At exactly 60 seconds in, the air detonated with the sound of bone-cracking silence, as if truth itself had been ripped open. The House Oversight chamber, normally polished and orderly, was now a battlefield dripping in tension. Marble columns stood like witnesses to war crimes. $2 million in undocumented wire transfers. 500 veterans denied medication reimbursements. 3 children in Houston dead from heat stroke because funding for grid modernization was diverted to a shell company listed under a Mar-a-Lago address. Who signs off on that kind of theft of life? And more importantly, who gets to call themselves an American after orchestrating it? The walls whispered secrets louder than microphones. They leaned in like sentient sentries, straining toward the scent of confrontation. The lights above bled white, surgical and merciless, exposing every twitch, every blink, every falsehood clinging to mascara or cufflink. The mahogany tables pulsed like restrained heartbeats. The silence didn't breathe, it throbbed. And then, she said it. Ivanka Trump leaned in, her voice silked in insult, and whispered across the microphone to Jasmine Crockett, "You're a fake American." Gasps didn't echo, they screamed in sharp staccato. It was a surgical strike disguised as a slight, and it landed with all the civility of a slap in church. Cameramen froze. One aide dropped a pen and didn't move to pick it up. Even Representative Gomert blinked for the first time in 20 minutes. But Jasmine Crockett did not blink. She inhaled once, like she was pulling the weight of generations into her lungs. Then she sat back slowly, the leather of her chair sighing with reverence, and she waited. She didn't return fire, not yet, because silence is a scalpel when truth is the blade. 3 rows back, a woman named Gloria Jimenez, 52, retired schoolteacher, mother of a Marine who died of preventable infection at a VA clinic, closed due to budget optimization, covered her mouth and whispered, "Don't let her get away with that," Jasmine heard. Somehow, through the static of menace and malice, she heard, and she began. One of us stood up for veterans when it wasn't convenient. One of us paid taxes. One of us didn't use shell corporations to buy beachfront real estate, while the other stood in courtrooms fighting for renters evicted during a pandemic. So the question isn't who's fake, it's who's afraid of what's real. Her voice didn't rise. It focused. It narrowed like the beam of an operating room spotlight. And suddenly, the air didn't just bleed, it clotted around her words. Ivanka Trump, seated to Jasmine's left, adjusted her blazer. The pearl clasp on her lapel looked too tight now. She tried to chuckle, but it caught in her throat like spoiled wine. Across the chamber, monitors flickered to life. The control room fed a silent reel onto the recessed screens. Headlines, FOIA disclosures, offshore wire diagrams, and an image of a Bahamas property linked to a company named Crown Arrow Holdings LLC. Jasmine let the screens play, eyes never leaving Ivanka's face. "You know what's fake?" Jasmine asked, voice barely louder than breath. "An ethics declaration signed on March 15, 2024, where you claimed 0 foreign holdings while your husband received $6.4 million from a sovereign wealth fund in the same fiscal quarter." The document was in her hand now. It was thick, cream-colored, like stolen innocence. It pulsed beneath her fingers. She didn't place it on the table. She laid it like a coroner's photo, deliberate and heavy, so that it touched the edge of Ivanka's notes, a paper so damning it could blister the wood underneath. The font sharp, the ink slightly raised, a document that whispered in its own language, "I am truth, and I am merciless." Cameras captured everything. Comment threads ignited like brush fires. She brought receipts. This ain't even close. Jasmine Crockett just broke the internet. The ceiling lights flickered as if reacting. The walls no longer whispered. They howled. A low voice from the crowd said, "She just started." Another murmured, "That's the first cut." Outside the Capitol, crowds had begun to form. Veterans in wheelchairs holding signs, "Where's our care?" Mothers with framed photos of lost sons. "My baby died waiting." The Washington air, thick with late summer humidity, was pierced by chants that hadn't existed 20 minutes ago. Jasmine's words had gone viral in real time. In a control room across the street, a technician said, "We're at 5 million viewers. Climbing." A producer whispered, "She just dismantled the brand." Back in the room, Jasmine leaned forward, slow as sunrise, and let the silence stretch like piano wire. Fake is when you inherit a country and sell it like it's a handbag. Ivanka Trump's lips twitched, searching for a response, a comeback, a leash for her own image. But the leash had already been cut. And Jasmine wasn't done. Behind her, another aide handed her a thick, leather-bound folder. Its clasp glinted under the surgical light. This wasn't evidence. This was indictment in paper form. Documents bled truth in careful calligraphy. Signatures, bank logos, redacted lines that screamed louder than unredacted ones. She placed it between them like a coffin and said nothing. A clock ticked, a throat cleared. Somewhere in the balcony, someone whispered, "This is history." The air no longer bled. It roared. And Jasmine Crockett smiled. Calm, composed, unbothered. The kind of smile you give right before you bring down an empire. The silence hadn't even settled when Jasmine Crockett unfastened the leather clasp. It snapped open like a gunshot in a cathedral. Inside, 3 sets of documents, each on thick cotton, linen stock, pale as bone, edged in red. They were warm under the light, almost too alive. Each sheet bore a signature, some elegant, some erratical, legally binding, all undeniable. The air in the chamber twisted. Even the marble seemed to flinch. Jasmine didn't lift the first document. She slid it slowly across the table toward Ivanka Trump, like a dealer revealing a bad hand, and she knew the other player couldn't fold. "This is a contract signed February 2nd, 2023. It authorized a $1.5 million consulting fee paid by a subsidiary of the Al Ramadi Development Fund, routed through 5 shell companies. You co-signed it." Ivanka's pupils contracted, her mouth parted slightly. "That wasn't," she began. Jasmine cut in, voice low, surgical. "Your signature? Then the Department of the Treasury must be lying, along with the U.S. Postal Inspector who traced the envelope from your private New York address. Or maybe the notary is lying too. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a simpler answer." She didn't need to raise her voice. She never did. Across the chamber, Representative Cohen leaned forward. Representative Presley mouthed, "Damn." The C-SPAN feed was already trending on 3 continents. In Houston, Gloria Jimenez's hands were trembling as she pointed at the screen in her living room, her late son's portrait beside her. "She found it," she said aloud, to no one in particular. "She finally found it." Jasmine turned to the second document. This one's a little heavier. March 3rd, 2023. A transfer of $800,000 from Crown Arrow Holdings into a Nevada PAC that just happened to purchase attack ads targeting oversight candidates. Your email is listed in the approval chain. She tapped the page with a single, unpainted nail. The tap echoed like a courtroom gavel. The room held its breath. "And the third," Jasmine said, lifting the last document, "is a signed authorization to shift over $2 million in COVID relief funds meant for housing vouchers into a real estate development project in West Palm Beach. 87 families were evicted in Orlando as a result. 3 children under the age of 10 are now confirmed dead due to heat stroke-related causes in temporary housing with no AC." She looked directly into the camera. 87 families. That's what $2 million buys when truth is collateral damage. Outside, the chants surged. Inside, Ivanka Trump opened her mouth, but no words came out. Just the faint rasp of a reputation collapsing. She reached for a bottle of water, and her hand shook. Jasmine leaned back, folding her hands like a surgeon after the first incision. "There are names," she continued, her voice slowing like a ritual. "Cameron Tisdale, age 9, asthma, evicted with his mother from public housing after the project was liquidated. He died in the back seat of her car while waiting for a county voucher that never came." She let the words hang. "There's also Mia Barnes, Age 7, diabetic, hospital generator failed during a rolling blackout that could have been prevented with the grid modernization funding that vanished. From the gallery, a quiet sob rose. Someone said, "Oh my God." "And what do all of these families have in common?" Jasmine asked, looking now at the entire committee. They weren't born with a Trump last name. A murmur surged through the room. It didn't fade, it grew. Jasmine opened her folder again. This time, she didn't touch the documents. She let their presence speak. Like weapons that didn't need to be fired to kill. In a control room, a feed tech whispered, "We just passed 11 million live viewers." A data analyst murmured, "Searches for Jasmine Crockett up 900%. Back in the chamber, Jasmine turned to the panel chair. "I move for a subpoena expansion under Section 3 of the Foreign Influence and Ethics Compliance Act. I have prepared the necessary documentation. We have reasonable cause, and frankly, we have a moral obligation." Representative Khanna nodded. "So ordered." Ivanka Trump stood now, or tried to. Her knees buckled slightly. She gripped the table edge with fingers that had once launched perfume lines. No one offered her a chair. Jasmine stood as well, and the chamber stilled. "Ivanka, you said I was a fake American, but I fight for the ones who don't have inherited shields. I don't sell silence. I document truth. And you know what the thing is about truth?" She stepped closer, gently picking up the top document. "It doesn't need your permission to exist." And with that, she handed the papers to the House clerk. At a school in Fort Worth, a teacher paused her civics class, turned up the volume, and said to her students, "Watch this. This is what courage looks like." The city outside wasn't sleeping anymore. Churches opened their doors for vigils. Veterans gathered outside local VA hospitals, demanding audits. Families called their representatives. Emails surged. The truth was no longer confined to paper. And Ivanka Trump, who had once glided through hearings like a ghost of branding past now, looked cornered, real, and utterly unprepared for the weight of the facts. The room was still reeling when Jasmine Crockett lifted the manila envelope. Not an ordinary one, this was military issue, stamped with an inventory barcode, corners curled with weight, the kind of envelope that smelled like ink and dust and buried things. The seal had been slit clean, its interior lined with silver anti-tamper mesh. It had pulsed under the lights like a heartbeat waiting to rupture. She held it up between thumb and forefinger, nothing flashy, no flourish, just calm surgical inevitability. Then, without a word, she let the contents slide out like a blade. 6 documents, all originals, one with a handwritten note in looping cursive that read, "Please don't let them erase him." The hearing room went dead quiet. The marble didn't just listen, it mourned. Jasmine set the documents on the table like sacred offerings, one by one. Each paper thudded with the weight of names, dollar signs, and signatures. She looked up at Ivanka Trump. The woman's eyes were glass now shiny, disconnected, hollow. Her composure, once rigid as lacquered porcelain, was starting to fracture. "This," Jasmine said evenly, tapping the top document, "is an internal memo dated April 8, 2024. It outlines a discretionary reallocation of emergency VA funds, $3.2 million diverted to a domestic infrastructure initiative in Florida." She turned it around to face the panel. "The recipient company? Valor Shoreline Ventures. On paper, it looks American. But if you dig," she pulled the second page, "you find a payment to Kushner International Holdings. 2 weeks later, those funds were split between a political consultancy and an LLC owned by your former White House hairstylist." A wave of disgust rippled through the room. Representative Lynch dropped his pen. Representative Ocasio-Cortez muttered, "Jesus Christ," under her breath. Jasmine wasn't finished. 412 veterans missed scheduled surgeries due to a funding freeze that followed. 26 of them died within 90 days. Here are their names. She unfurled the third sheet. It was long, too long. The silence was unbearable. Harold Atwater, age 67, Vietnam, bladder cancer, canceled procedure. She looked at Ivanka. Elaine Burton, age 71, widow of a Gulf War pilot, died from sepsis while waiting for infection removal surgery that was rescheduled indefinitely. Ivanka's lips twitched. She looked down at her hands as if hoping to disappear into them. And then, Jasmine said, lifting the final page with a handwritten note, there's Emmanuel Griggs, age 29, Afghanistan, Bronze Star, double amputee. Died of a heart attack after being turned away from a counseling session due to staff shortages. Jasmine held up the note. It was written by his mother, Loretta. She mailed it to my office with his funeral pamphlet. She said, if I had 10 minutes in a room with the people who let my son die, I would ask them why his blood wasn't worth as much as their beach homes. The camera zoomed in slowly. Would you like to answer her, Ivanka? The woman froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. From the public gallery, Loretta Griggs stood, slowly. Her voice shook but rose. You looked into cameras and told us you cared about veterans. You said they mattered, and you let my son die for a tax write-off. No one interrupted, no gavel, no security, just the raw, uncontestable power of a mother's grief. Jasmine didn't blink. Her next words landed like surgical steel. You don't steal money. You steal time. You stole a man's chance to watch his daughter learn to read. You stole breath. You stole the rest of someone's life and buried it in an offshore account. The crowd outside was now in the thousands. Projectors streamed the hearing onto building walls. Candles lit the concrete like constellations. People held up photographs of loved ones, some with signs that simply read, "She's saying what we couldn't." Back in the chamber, Jasmine turned to the fourth document. This one wasn't financial, it was spiritual. Your team authorized a commemorative plaque at the West Palm Beach development. A little bronze square. Guess whose name is on it? She didn't wait. Ivanka Trump. No mention of the veterans. Just you. In script. Ivanka looked up. Her voice emerged in a desperate, high whisper. That was a branding partnership I didn't handle. Jasmine cut her off with a single raised palm. Justice doesn't scream, it documents. The clerk walked forward. Jasmine handed over all 6 documents, including Loretta Griggs's letter. The screens behind them changed timelines, transaction flows, a pulsing red arrow from West Palm Beach to Riyadh to New York. Then photos, the plaque, Emmanuel's headstone, the empty VA clinic. Ivanka Trump slumped slightly in her seat, hairline damp. Her hand trembled again as she reached for her water, but the bottle was empty now. No one offered her more. And Jasmine poised, deliberate, turned to the chair again. I move for immediate perjury referral, under Section 9 of the Ethics Reform Act, and I request this committee begin impeachment referral proceedings for misuse of public funds tied to international financial manipulation. Representative Raskin nodded. Seconded. Consider it entered. The crowd outside erupted in cheers. In Detroit, a veteran named Marcus dialed his daughter and said, "You need to watch this. That woman? That's our Congresswoman." Jasmine stood tall, her voice now carrying the full gravity of the moment. You don't get to wear patriotism like a brand. Not while people are bleeding behind you. Not while mothers are burying sons. She turned slowly, locking eyes with every camera lens in the room. This isn't about politics. This is about people. And we just put the receipts on the table. Before the echoes faded, Jasmine Crockett walked to the center of the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room followed her like gravity. Eyes clung to her every motion. The lights above sharpened, casting surgical beams across her face and down the length of the hearing table. Her steps made no sound, but they struck like verdicts. She turned slowly toward Ivanka Trump, who now sat like a relic, polished, hollow, increasingly irrelevant. Her posture had collapsed into herself. Her blouse, once flawless, was now creased at the collar. A bead of sweat slid from her temple, traced the line of her jaw, and vanished beneath pearls that now looked like shackles. Jasmine placed a black binder on the desk. This, she said, is where the trail ends. She opened it, and the air changed. Not metaphorically, literally. The lights above dimmed slightly, as if the binder itself demanded atmosphere. Inside, pages sealed in protective covers, numbered, tabbed, catalogued. The binder whispered secrets. The plastic sleeves fogged faintly from contact with air. The truth inside had waited long enough. "This," Jasmine said, lifting the first document, "is the charter for Valor Shoreline Ventures, filed under a false EIN belonging to a shuttered nonprofit in Alabama." She flipped to the next page. "This is the authorization from the Florida Department of Commerce to fast-track tax incentives for a development project that on paper would create 200 jobs, 0 of which materialized." She paused. "And this is the lease agreement for the luxury penthouse purchased with the proceeds of that same project. Unit 41B, oceanfront, 4 bedrooms. Market value, $3.1 million. She laid that page flat, revealing the signature at the bottom. Ivanka Trump. There was no whisper this time, no gasp, just the stillness of impact, an impact so total it annihilated sound. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned to the panel chair. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the projection screens. Representative Raskin nodded. "Proceed." The screens behind the dais ignited. Jasmine tapped her tablet once. A map appeared, glowing red, tracing federal relief funds from their congressional authorization to shell entities across the Bahamas, Cayman Islands, and Dubai. Pulsing lines marked every stop, every diversion, every laundering loop. "This is not abstract," Jasmine said. "It's not about bureaucratic mismanagement or clerical confusion. It's theft. Cold, calculated, industrial-scale theft." The screen shifted. Now, faces. Photos of the 26 veterans who died in the 90-day window after their surgeries were canceled. Faces that weren't just statistics. Faces with stories. Jasmine stepped forward. "That's Leonard Franklin, age 81, Korea. He used to write letters to high school kids about courage. He died alone in a hallway because the cardiac unit had 1 nurse instead of 5. Next image. Yvette Monroe, age 69, Navy. Her daughter found her collapsed in her kitchen. Her insulin coverage had lapsed after a temporary funding hold redirected funds into a South Florida PAC. And then Jasmine turned back to Ivanka. "You looked in the camera. You told America you wanted to uplift women. But the truth is, you were siphoning futures." She paused. "You didn't just defund health, you defunded hope." On screen, a new image, a receipt, time-stamped, June 3, 2024. A wire transfer for $800,000. Destination, the Trump Organization. Memo line, consulting, post, hurricane logistics. The screen split in two. On one side, the transfer. On the other, a news article from the same day. 12-year-old dies waiting for dialysis as clinic shuts doors. Jasmine turned to the panel. Her name was Destiny Palmer. She had 1 kidney. She was a straight-A student who wanted to be a nurse. But we shut her clinic down, and that money paid for a PR firm in New York. The room was no longer just listening, it was grieving. Behind Jasmine, the crowd outside erupted in new chants. A massive screen displayed the hearing feed in real time. Candles now numbered in the thousands. People held up photos. Others held mirrors, reflecting the truth back at the Capitol. In the chamber, Ivanka finally broke. "I didn't sign those wires myself," she croaked. "It was this is being taken out of context." Jasmine's voice was calm, surgical. "You don't get to redact responsibility." Ivanka stood. "This is a political ambush. I've never stolen anything in my life." Jasmine stepped forward and opened the final tab in the binder. It was different. A small handwritten ledger. Ink faded. Water damage on the corners. The cover read, "Personal, 2020 to 2023. It belonged to an assistant anonymous until now." Inside, notes, times, receipts, and 1 chilling phrase underlined 3 times. Ivanka approved. No paper trail. Use Kushner's back channel. Jasmine looked straight into Ivanka's crumbling facade. You wanted invisible fingerprints. You thought erasure was protection. But erasure doesn't erase suffering. And then she delivered it. The line that would ricochet across history. You didn't just fail to tell the truth. You tried to bury it alive. I came here to dig it up. Outside, gasps, cheers, tears. In living rooms across the country, people stood. Not metaphorically, literally, stood up. As if truth demanded posture. Inside, Representative Khanna wiped a tear. Representative Bowman nodded slowly, reverently. The chamber door opened. A courier entered. Jasmine turned. The clerk handed her a single-page document. Confirmation from the Department of Justice. An active preliminary inquiry had been launched, based on today's testimony. Real-time justice. Jasmine handed the letter to the chair, then turned one last time to Ivanka. You can run from subpoenas. You can hide behind press releases. But the truth always finds its name. Ivanka slumped back into her chair. The weight of the binder remained. The binder still sat on the table like a gravestone. Ivanka Trump hadn't spoken in 11 minutes. Her gaze was distant now somewhere, beyond the cameras, past the oak-paneled walls, beyond the reality she once curated like a lifestyle blog. The room no longer looked at her. It watched Jasmine Crockett, who stood tall, still, centered in the room like the eye of a hurricane she herself had summoned. The silence was holy. Then Jasmine reached into her jacket and pulled out one last envelope. Thin, no seal, no drama, just paper. But when she held it up, every device in the chamber focused in, and every person in the crowd outside pressed closer to their screens. This, she said, is not evidence. This is consequence. She handed it to the clerk. The camera caught a glimpse before it left her hand. A single-page letter, notarized, addressed to the Committee on Ethics and Government Oversight. Subject line, formal resignation, effective immediately. The sender, Thomas B. Cartwright, former Undersecretary of Housing Appropriations, and key figure in the offshore routing chain. His brief statement read, I am resigning because I refuse to be complicit another day. Rep. Crockett showed us who we've become. I will not die on the wrong side of this. Jasmine faced the room. Her voice, still calm, broke through everything like a scalpel through armor. Let me say this plainly. The time of consequence is here. We've built an empire on excuses, on loopholes, on the illusion of patriotism sewn into profit margins. That era ends today. She stepped back to the center. The screens behind her changed again. Now, letters of support. Live video of veterans outside VA hospitals, holding up signs with their loved ones' names. Schools watching in real time. Hospitals tuning in between rounds. A shot from Philadelphia. A 10-year-old girl, Destiny Palmer's cousin, standing outside a city hall with a sign that read, My cousin mattered. Jasmine turned toward the press gallery. To the American people watching, you were never crazy. The corruption you felt pressing down on your back, in your bank account, in your power bill, in your prescriptions, that was real. And they knew it. They counted on your exhaustion. But today, we count it as fuel. Reporters were weeping. Grown men clutching press passes held hands. The woman from the Houston Tribune, who'd broken the original housing diversion story, put her pen down. She just finished it, she whispered. She closed the loop. Jasmine turned toward the panel. Today, I'm submitting the full binder to the DOJ Inspector General, the Veterans Affairs Oversight Commission, and the SEC. This body will also refer criminal proceedings under Section 5 of the Public Funds Integrity Act. That includes Ivanka Trump and all named associates. Representative Raskin, voice tight with emotion, responded, Let the record reflect unanimous consent for full federal referral. And then it happened. The clerk read the roll call. Names echoed through the chamber like bells, tolling the end of a dynasty. With each aye, the walls of that room trembled not from noise, but from the sheer weight of consequence finally being given form. As the final vote was recorded, a low chant began from outside. Slow, almost reverent. She told the truth, she told the truth, she told the truth. Jasmine faced the cameras one last time. She spoke not as a congresswoman now, but as a daughter, a lawyer, a witness to injustice, and an unflinching executor of truth. We don't heal by hiding. We don't protect by pretending. You don't get to steal from this country and wear its flag like armor. You don't get to kill futures and call it capitalism. She paused. And you sure don't get to call me un-American when I came here to do the one thing real Americans still believe in: accountability. Outside, the chant erupted into cheers. Bells rang. Car horns honked. Social media flooded with the clip. Jasmine, unflinching, binder in hand, saying the words that had echoed through generations but were finally recorded in the congressional record. You don't get to call me un-American. Not when I showed up with the truth. On the floor, Ivanka Trump whispered something inaudible and turned away. Her lawyers stood to shield her from the cameras. She exited without another word. No press statement. No exit applause. Just silence. Across the nation, the ripple was immediate. At Fort Bragg, a group of veterans lowered their flags to half-mast, not for a fallen soldier, but for the system that failed so many of them. Then they raised them again. For her. In a classroom in Oakland, a boy raised his hand and asked his teacher, "Is she the president now?" The class laughed. The teacher said, "Not yet." In churches, vigils turned into town halls. People spoke for the first time in years. They brought paper trails. They brought stories. They brought truth. And Jasmine Crockett? She walked out of that chamber through a tunnel of people silently parting, like the Red Sea, to make way for justice on 2 feet. Her face was composed, her eyes ahead, her hands still. No celebration. Just continuation. As she exited the building, a woman in the crowd shouted, "We see you!" Another cried, "Keep going!" A third said, "Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for documenting." A little girl, maybe 6, looked up from her father's shoulders and asked, "Daddy, is she a superhero?" He didn't flinch. "She's something better," he said. "She's what the truth looks like."